You're listening to the Wedding Biz Network, the voice of the creative entrepreneur. Hey everyone, it's Andy Kushner, host of The Wedding Biz, in which I conduct in-depth and revealing interviews of icons and those who I feel are the next generation icons of the weddings and event industry, all to provide you with education and inspiration. So if you missed last week's episode, it was with Tom Kehoe, CEO of Kehoe Designs. It was a fascinating interview because of all that he's doing with multiple companies, so be sure to check it out if you missed it. Today's guest is Annie Lee. Annie is the principal planner of Daughter of Design, author of Learn to Speak Wedding, Flashcards for Beginners, and founder of Plannie.com, which is a global platform to hire an event planner by the hour. Daughter of Design has been named as a top planner by Harper's Bazaar, The Knot, Martha Stewart, Brides, and PartySlate. Annie is also recognized as the Wedding Doctor by Refinery29, Party Planner by New York Magazine, Celebrity Entertaining Expert by People Magazine, and Shape Magazine's Woman in Action Entertaining Expert. Annie also has the honor of being named one of 5 Women of Style by Modern Luxury Miami. Enjoy this conversation with Annie Lee. Hey, Annie, it is so good to have you on The Wedding Biz. Thank you for taking time today. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And, you know, I kind of looked up some information on you. And
what does the internet say?
No, it's all good.
Yeah.
There's nothing but good stuff. And I saw that you started your career in marketing with interning with the San Francisco Opera. And I'm wondering, before we get into that, was there anything else when you were growing up that, in terms of having some kind of a passion for the event industry, or did it start with that internship?
No, I think events. For sure, that was discovered through the San Francisco Opera and attending one of the opening season galas. And I was like, this is what I want to do. And then I don't know if you know, you probably also dug this up somewhere on the internet as well, but my family does interior design. So I grew up in kind of like the back of a warehouse playing with fabrics and textiles and all these kind of things. So when the event part came into that piece of the puzzle fell into place for me, it just kind of brought along with my background of design, interior design, that I had just kind of grown up with. So it all started to make sense.
And then did you go to school for any of this?
Nope. You know what, actually? So I went to Berkeley and I majored in history. And I will say that my knowledge of history and how I pay attention to I like to be very historically accurate, mm-hmm. and also geographically accurate, culturally accurate. So a lot of times I'll see a room, I'm like, that's Moroccan and Indian prints put together.
Whoa,
I'm like, or, and people do it it's just, I see it in all sorts of places. Even I did an event in Tokyo, and when I went and they do the reverse where, here I'll see, I'm like, oh yeah, that's Chinese and Thai mixed together. But okay, and I went to Asia, I'm like, that's French and English, all shoved into one room. And it doesn't really make sense. But, if it's not your area of expertise, that people sometimes don't know how to decipher between what looks kind of from their perspective, one thing. But anyways, so that's how I justify my degree in history came into play, because I can, kind of understand what time period that was. What era was that? Was it Rococo or was it Baroque? That kind of thing.
Yeah, that's so interesting that you have that knowledge. That's cool how you apply it. So after the interning, with the San Francisco Opera, you started to work for a local planner, and then you moved to New York City. Now, when you moved to New York City, did you already have a job? I mean, I know you worked for BizBash, or did you just say, I'm going to go for it? I'm going to, why did you make that move?
So after, that was, and someone said it best. They're like, when you're younger, you just don't know to be afraid, or you just do things.
Right.
And it was like, I'd moved actually down to Orange County with my college boyfriend, broke up, of course, immediately upon arriving. Right. And then, as you do. And then I was actually on the law track. So I don't know if you saw that.
No, I didn't. No.
I was on the law track, and then around then decided I don't want to do law, but I had always been kind of law and events moonlighting, and had one friend from college who had moved to New York, and she was like, you should, we were on AIM, if you remember that chat, and
Way
she was
back,
like,
yeah.
yeah, she's like, you should move to New York. And I was like, she's like, just like come for a year. And I was like, oh, that'd be fun. And so I just looked up jobs, and then I remember I found one for Vera Wang, and it was to literally be like the alterations assistant for their bridesmaid line. So I applied, and I got an interview, and they're like, can you come out for an interview? And I used her address. So I pretended I was there. So I was like, yes. And I took the day off. The next day at work, I flew out and then interviewed and got the job. But they wanted me to start out like immediately, like that Monday. And I was like, oh, I have to, like, not knowing I had to like wrap up my life in California
Right.
to move out. And I was like, oh, I need like a couple weeks. And they're like, oh, that's not going to work. So at that point, the seed had been planted, and I had decided, okay, I've got to move to New York. And so I moved back, I flew back, gave my notice, like sold the car I just bought, sold all the furniture I just bought for my new apartment, and started looking for a job. And so, my first job in New York City was selling wedding dresses at Wedding Atelier, not Mark Ingram, at the other, Wedding Atelier, not Bridal Atelier. And had never worked retail or anything like that before, only made it like 2 months, and then decided like I need to be back in the office. And that's when I was very, very actively looking. I mean, it's actually, I'll sideline for a second. One of my favorite career moments was I saved all the cover letters. I made it a thing that I was going to send at least 10 to 15 cover letters and resumes to random people that did not even have a posting. So I sent a cover letter almost to every one of the people that I'm colleagues with today, who had been my senior, let's say. And I have them all still. And I had the one I had sent to David Beam, if you know David Beam.
Sure. He was on the show a few times. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and he, without knowing, had been kind of like the bellwether of my career. Just kind of how I tracked how I've been growing. I sat next to him at a Creative Edge 20th anniversary dinner. And I remember thinking like, wow, 5 years ago, I was begging to be your intern. And now here I am sitting next to you at this dinner. Few years fast forward, I did the Not Gala, and he was the designer. And I was like, pinch me. I can't believe it that I'm like here, at this industry event being the planner for this magazine, The Knot. And then fast forward to when we had our first event together finally, and it was almost 10 years to the day that I had sent him that cover letter. So I wrote him a letter, and I handed it to him at the wedding. I was like, hi, this is just a follow-up to my cover letter. Oh. And I just wanted to see. And I didn't know, like, I actually get emotional talking about it because I didn't know he was going to get emotional. And like, it was just like this moment. Anyway, so
yeah, that's sweet. I love all these serendipitous kind of stories, and it just, I don't know, the universe sends these signals, kind of confirming that you're on the right track. And so I think that's cool. So, in terms of starting your own business, I know that you started in 2008, was that during the recession, basically?
So 2008 is when I went full time, but for 2 years before that, I was just moonlighting. So I had worked after interning with the Biz Bash, like their convention show thing. They introduced me to Tribeca Film Festival. And so I started working at Tribeca Film Festival as like a marketing associate, and then eventually grew into becoming their sponsorship event manager. But before then, when I used to joke that they paid me in hors d'oeuvres because I went to the coolest parties, I'm 20 something in New York City, just moved to New York City, going to these film, festival parties, but paid nothing. So I was looking for kind of just like side income, and I couldn't, I've never been a server. I didn't know how to do retail. So I was like, I used to plan these events, and why don't I just do that on the side? And someone wanted to get married at Tribeca Cinemas, which was the event space for Tribeca Film Festival. And I was like, oh, you guys, I used to do weddings. I can help. And after doing that, I was like, oh, I forgot how much I like this. And it's good, like moonlight, like side money. So then I just started putting the word out there, friends of friends. And then I remember like my first like stranger client, and I was like, ooh, I'm a real business now. And then this is like a small like shift. And then I worked for a company called The Small World, if you remember that social network. Anyway, so I went there momentarily, but then I was very much like basically juggling the two jobs because my planning company was growing, but would lunch break, before work, after work, and just like, was having the two full-time jobs essentially. And by 2008, I was like, you know what? I have enough on the books to go full-time. And like, whatever, if I fail, I'll just pick up a job again. And so I went full-time and then everything went down. But actually for me, my business almost tripled that next year. And I think what I am lucky is that because I was so junior, that my rates were favorable. I don't know how the rest of my, more senior colleagues did at that time, but also in my kind of like historian hat on, I think because all corporate events had to be shut down, but no one was giving any criticism for hosting a social event. Like, no one's going to criticize you for getting married during a recession. And that's when you saw a trend shift from like glitzy glam over the top luxe to all that rustic barn reclaimed, like, mason jars. That trend came pouring in 2008 because things couldn't look as ostentatious.
I remember that. Yeah.
And that was it for like that rustic, natural, organic look was in for so long. And I very much, correlate that with people couldn't be as flashy. They spent the same amount of money. That also costs a lot of money just to produce, even as like, if it's like hay bushels, it still costs quite a lot to put on that kind of production, but it just didn't look as ostentatious. So that's my recession assessment.
Yeah.
And trends.
Yeah. Well, and to have tripled in the next year, I mean, that was just such good timing for you. So, coming to today, like Annie, how would you identify some facets of your personal signature? Like if you were to meet someone somewhere, a client, and potential client, and they were to ask about your style, like how would you put that in words?
I would say that, especially for Daughter of Design, the kind of approach and the look and feel and kind of what I think like, air quotes, like signature look would be, is that it's very like boutique hotel vibes, very much more designer and very much more interior designed looking than banquet design. And that's really my MO is when I do these, especially, event planning is one part, but the event designing component, the visual part, I don't go for over the top. I want it to look like it's the coolest restaurant opening that's happening or like the coolest Oscar party that night, and just have a very adult and dare I, use the word sexy and moody and, just like it just feels like cool. I guess it's the only way I can say.
Well, when you said boutique hotel, that immediately, created an image for me. And so I love that description. So when you first meet a wedding client, a couple, like, can you take me through the process, how it is that you work with them to the way you get to know them and then to get the vision in your mind about what this is going to look like for each particular client? Can you kind of talk about that for a bit?
Yeah, there's a few building blocks we definitely use so obviously once we have the location, I never want to fight the interior design of a location, right? So if it's a historical building, I'm not bringing in loose site furniture. If it's a, modern loft, we can obviously play around with that, but we can go minimalist. We can, I try to stay true to the bones and the environment that we're in. If it's a destination, I'm not doing like a New York City style plaza hotel in Mexico. You know what I mean? So I'm trying to keep it as true to like the sense of like the place that we're at, give a sense of place, all of that. And then that's like the foundation. Then above that, it is the client's obviously personal taste. One of the biggest things I want is when I want it to feel like it's their fingerprints and it being like all over the wedding and have a sense of like you've invited them into their home, right? And it just looks and feels like the guest of honor, like the couple. And then on top of that, and then between that, what I'm creating like this boundary around is I would say like all of our events are very different, but the common denominator is that I would hope that they all are very tasteful and very fashionable and kind of also evergreen. I don't like I don't like trendy. I like things that are going to be pretty resistance against time. So, I look at some weddings that I have from like 12 years ago. I'm like, that's still pretty. I'm like so happy that that's still like relevant, and that's just going to be kind of iconic, or it just doesn't age in a bad way. So yeah, I mean, obviously, like we'll do things that, like last like 2 weekends ago, we did an after party and we did like a Squid Game surprise.
Oh, that's great. But yeah.
So and like for another client, we were thinking about doing an NFT save the date.
Oh,
so I like to pull in like relevant today things, like, like we had, my favorite is when Cronuts first came out and it was impossible to get your hands on one. We were able to get a bunch of them, and we just gave them out as favors with a sticker on top that said, "You're welcome." And people lost their minds. It's like, at the time, it was just like the coolest thing. So we try to sprinkle in a little bit of something relevant to today that is just again, that cool factor and surprise. But visually and kind of how we build, it's really like the place, the couple, and then trying to keep it very tasteful, not over the top and timeless.
I want to be sure you know the wonderful news of our latest show, Stop and Smell the Roses, with acclaimed lifestyle and event design expert Preston Bailey. Not only will he share the secrets, tools, and technologies behind his extraordinary ability to create a theatrical environment out of any space, you will also discover more about the man behind the magic. Preston will reveal how his focus on personal growth has been the root of his professional success, and you'll have the opportunity for him to answer your questions along the way. Plus, Preston will be inviting onto the show many of the star celebrities he has worked with in the past, so you don't want to miss a single episode. We also have another great show on the Wedding Biz Network, The Business of Being Creative, with host Sean Lowe. Since debuting, his show has really taken off, and he's continuing to bring you the creative business advice he's shared with accomplished industry notables. Be sure to take advantage of Sean's talkback opportunity by recording questions and comments from right there in each episode's show notes. So, if you are a creative who is turning your craft into a business or want to take it to another level, head to theweddingbiznetwork.com and take a listen to Stop and Smell the Roses with Preston Bailey and The Business of Being Creative with Sean Lowe. That's theweddingbiznetwork.com. One of the things that I always like to get into is, what is the hardest part of what you do, Annie? Like what do you still struggle with in that sense? What's really tough, the hard part of this job?
I mean, I think most people would agree. I mean, like, look, we've got like supply chain issues, we've got like staffing issues right now. But I would say, of course, like managing clients and managing their expectations. I just happen to be very good with like therapy-ish type of relationships, like with my clients. But that is always something, right? Someone actually recently asked me, how many hours would it take, or how many hours on average does it take you to design a wedding? I'm like, I don't know, like 50, right? And they're like, and how many would it take you if your client was involved? I was like, 5. so it, like, for me, if it was just like, if you let me go for it and just let me, like, I already have it in my head, and the whole time I'm just kind of like trying to steer them into the direction that I already like know. Like, I think the way that we should do it is like is not the challenge, but it's just part of the process, right? Is kind of like it's an education. It's getting them to kind of understand like how it works and what the design would look like. It's, the reason why I have a job and why people come to me is because not everyone can visualize immediately like what will this room look like with 20 tables in it. I'm like, yeah, I see it. But like then the rest of my time, I kind of just do everything I can to show them so that they can see it before the day.
Right. And you mentioned the therapy aspect. I mean, I know that it's such an emotional situation for these couples and with the extended family, depending on who's involved. And it seems that, yeah, as a planner, from what I understand, well, even in my situation, I mean, I have a music and entertainment business. There are definitely moments where I've got to kind of, help them to stay calm or help center, focus
mediate them.
Yeah, in a sense. And there was one time, Annie, I remember God, it's so vivid in my mind. I was in person meeting with a bride and her mother, and they started, I'm sure you've seen this too, they started to fight like crazy in front of me. And then later, the mother called me and she was almost, practically crying and saying to me, I mean, we got to know each other real well. And she was saying, I just don't know what to do, with my daughter. And the thing is, during that meeting, what I noticed was that the mother was extremely controlling, like basically trying to dictate what this wedding was going to be like. And so I, in a very, of course, diplomatic way, I said to her on the phone, well, I would suggest that, maybe you have a conversation with your daughter and just ask her what she would really like to have, and how she would like it to go. And even though that was so simple, she then called me later telling me she had done it and, it really worked well. But it's interesting how we get put into those positions.
I think I almost want to do a survey of like what zodiac sign is everyone who works in the event industry, especially planners. But I obviously run into that situation all the time. And there's a lot of like life lessons out of seeing those situations, which actually has improved my relationship with my own mother and family, because we see that all the time. And I'm like, oh, I talk like my mom. I talk like that to my mom sometimes,
Yeah.
And it's because we just don't have the same kind of, because when you are so close to someone, you don't have to have the same patience, which is kind of crappy because the people that you're closest to, you kind of treat the least courteously, like, the stranger, you're much nicer to. But it's like, look, everyone, it comes from caring. So I try to remind everyone, it's because everyone cares so much.
That's a great point to point out. Yeah.
But at the same time, as a third party, it sounds different. I could say the same thing as her mother, but I always say it's like your doctor telling you to lose 5 pounds or your boyfriend telling you to lose 5 pounds.
Yeah, right. Right.
It's the same information, but because it's coming from two different people, like in your lives that you have different relationships and closeness with, it comes across, it gets taken in differently. So I'm aware of all of that. And I think anyone in the industry is. And yeah, it presents like extra obstacles sometimes, but that's very mumuch a part of the job. And that's part of the job description.
Yeah, it definitely is. Also there was an interview, I don't remember which one it was, but you had let yourself be vulnerable and you admitted that around 2015, 2016, your wedding business plummeted, as you said, and possibly because people assumed that you only did a certain high level of events. I mean, after tripling your business from 2008 to 2009, and then just 6 years later, which is still, you're relatively new in a sense, and then to have that happen, I mean, what can you tell me more about that?
A couple of people have told me about it. It's a double-edged sword, right? So when you get bigger clients, but there's less bigger clients in that pond, right? So there's fewer fish. And then so certain people automatically think you're out of their kind of realm now. So then like the people who are your bread and butter suddenly are not approaching you. I've heard this from people who do like after doing a celebrity wedding that's very public,
right.
They also feel the same kind of drop because they're like, oh, they only do such and such a type people, or they didn't like that celebrity, or they didn't like the style of wedding that celebrity did, or, so it's tricky. And I don't also know, and I would be very curious. I heard it from a few people, but it might also be that it was election year and people were feeling uncertain, because I've heard from others that like sometimes during like big election years that people can be a little bit more cautious with how they spend. But I really think it was probably more so that I had kind of made that leap, like a bigger leap around that time.
But how did you get out of that? Like if that's what you felt, that people were making assumptions about the level of events, how did you change the perception of the public? How did you do that?
Well, okay. I think our number one reach to like address public or people we don't know is Instagram, right? So it's posting things that are more approachable so that they know that you're not just doing the $1 million somethings. And actually, to be honest, I don't know that I actually recovered from that on the wedding side in terms of my full service clients. I never got a return to that volume I had pre 2016. What I did instead was in starting like that early 2018 season, I happened to get into corporate and big corporate business. Like I started doing a ton of beauty events because one of my clients was a VP at Benefit Cosmetics and like had a 911 situation, came and asked me, could I help with something? And after that kind of just launched a whole nother sector of my company. So I was filling that gap really with the corporate. And then, and I'm sure we'll talk about Plannie in a second, but then I also have, so basically I just try to have like many horses in the race, right? So my other one was offering hourly planning, which I've been doing since 2009, but I really formalized it as its own separate platform and just being able to service kind of like everyone then. Any call I get, there's an option for someone and there's ways for me to capture that business.
Is this you doing it or you also, is it like a referral service, hooking them up with other people? It's totally you.
It's Annie, but Plannie, it's a PL in front of my name. So it's, my friends, some of my friends nicknamed me Annie Plannie. And so it was other things before that throughout my life. But,
right.
In my professional career, I'm Annie Plannie. And so I had owned Plannie.com, AnniePlannie.com, all of those for years. And then when I kind of decided in 2019, I had it in my head forever. I'm like, I need this to be its own platform. It should be more than just me on it as well. Like, it's not just Daughter of Design behind it. It's a network of planners in cities worldwide who are offering hourly planning services. And then on top of that, we're now offering, like a place for gig workers and freelancers to have direct access to anyone looking for any day of help. Because, I don't know if you know, but planners don't want to touch a day of gig, like with a 10-foot pole. It's not good for our brand. It has no margins. It's just like, there's no need for us to get involved in that. But people, it's actually interesting that I'm getting way more inquiries for that part than the actual hourly. Like, that was the add-on service. And suddenly I'm finding that that's more popular and more a service that people are actually looking for.
Well, and I heard somewhere, read somewhere that you said that you feel that wedding planners, you don't feel that they're compensated accurately, regardless of whether it's a flat rate or a percentage.
If you got a bunch of planners in the room and asked the question, do you feel like you get compensated fairly? I would almost put money on it that almost unanimously they would all say no. And yeah, you get your handful of clients that are like come in way under and who are just so easy and like barely want to email or talk or do anything or change their minds. But for the most part, I would say that it's two things. It's that I call it like being an all-you-can-eat buffet. That's just the way that we set ourselves up in these like packages, and even percentages are a little bit better than the flat rates, but still not amazing at the end of the day. And then it's like the going rate, right? We can only charge so much because of market value in whatever city you're in. Is like your colleagues are saying that a full package is going to be, $20,000 in Chicago. So then and like whoever's at the top also of each market a little bit dictates what is the rest of the market going to be. Because if you're like, well, Mindy's charging this, so everyone kind of then like prorates themselves below that based on, what the top dog of whatever city is charging. So I'm very big on this kick. And I've actually, I'm like, if I say it out loud now, I'm committing to it.
Okay.
But I've actually, I've only now the last two or three clients, I've changed completely. So even my full service through Daughter of Design, I'm only doing hourly planning. I don't want to, I think it's a fair transaction. I think it's transparent. I think it's reasonable to say, same thing for the client. If they're not going to take as much time or they're going to do some of the legwork on their own, why should they overpay? And, reverse the same thing. You never know what the project's going to turn into on day one. You never know how the client, what changes might happen, what other outside parties might come in and have other time-consuming meetings and conversations. And so this is just a way to make it very fair. And I always say, why are we the only consultants out there who do not charge by our time.
Interesting.
Everyone else does.
So you're tracking your time and then you're sending them the details of all of it.
Exactly. It's on a time log that they have access to always, so they can see at any time where they're at with their time credit. And maybe this goes back to, actually, I'm probably very influenced by when I used to work in law, and we used to keep timesheets. We used to use this system called DTE, and you do a time log and you would put 0.2 hours researching docket or whatever it was, right? So you just tracked your time and it wasn't a big deal. And that's how it was, that's how you charge based on your time.
But don't clients, though, want to have an idea before hiring you of what the range might be? I mean, how do you handle that kind of a question?
I can give like an estimate. Of course, it varies. And I always explain it like looking for a venue or doing the design is like looking for scissors in your house, because it could be the first drawer you open, or it could be like after you've ransacked your whole house. So you just never know, but you have control over it. Ultimately, you have the flexibility and the control to be like, actually, I'm going to do this part then, or yeah, I'm good here, or like, but it should be, in my opinion, proportionate to the amount of time it takes. So it just seems fair. And if anyone doesn't like that system, it's also an indicator to me that they probably know that they're the type that will use quite a bit of time and like, not abuse the system, but a little bit.
And what is, I don't know if I'm saying this right, Maroo?
Maroo. So Maroo is a company that I started advising in November of 2020. Yes. And they're a wedding fintech company, which is very exciting. If for people who don't know, fintech is like, financial technology. And so their, tagline would be a smarter way to pay. And so right now, I think the way that the wedding industry is, it could use a kick in the butt, right? And all across the board. It's like kind of like this, like if I was to liken it to like the infrastructure bill, like we need to like rebuild our roads. We've been using these same ways forever, but we could do better. And it is just that, people do checks. Maybe they do wires, which have fees, credit cards, which have fees, and then also on the client side, I think there was some like crazy stat, like 70% of couples go into debt around their wedding.
Wow.
And they're using credit cards that have like what, anywhere from like, 17 to 25
sure.
percent APR. And so this is a way, it's kind of like, well, it is like a buy now, pay later. It's like, it gives you not only lower rates, it gives you, the opportunity to pay by installment, which I think is, hey, anyone who survived 2020 knows I'm against large deposits now all across the board. I like smaller payments. I'd rather do several smaller payments than put a giant deposit down and then something happen.
Well, you're talking about cash flow?
Well, not only cash flow, but also commitment. Like I've changed all my contracts. And when I have contracts with vendors, I try to have them reduce their deposit amounts, just take more deposits frequently throughout the year, but not sign with like a 70% deposit or 50% deposit. I'd rather do 25 now, 25 in 3 months, 25 in, 6 months, whatever it might be, just to break that up, because that non-refundable deposit is scary. And like I was, we're coming out of it, but I'm sure you might have also felt this.
Sure, we had to deal with it too. Yeah, returning deposits, which was quite...
Well, when people were starting to plan, technically, like if you return deposits, that's very kind of you. I don't want to say, I don't even know if kind is the right word, but like it wasn't required. If your contract says non-refundable deposit, unless it says even in a force majeure situation, like because insurances, we're getting really into it. We're getting to the weeds here, but like insurance companies were not reimbursing businesses for the loss. So
yeah, well, we dealt with it, in my company kind of on a one-on-one basis, but I also have this philosophy, and I had this back when 9/11 happened and, other big moments like that, where why should we in the wedding industry take 100% responsibility for that kind of an occurrence? We had nothing to do with it. Of course, neither did the client, but why wouldn't we share, the cost of how that impacted us, as opposed to us taking it on 100% and giving a total deposit back. It was a tough time figuring out what to do.
And I don't think that because, everyone's like, oh, the clients, their wedding. I'm like, yes, but also the vendors. And I don't know if you saw, I made this one post that went semi-viral, right in the beginning of everything. I did this postpone, don't cancel little meme-ish thing. And I'm like, gosh, had I known it was going to grow such legs, I would have made it cuter, or written something more impactful. But I just realized okay, for us, for on the vendor side, we can't have 1,000 cancellations. We need to make sure people postpone, because the fight over deposits, the loss of future income, that's going to be a situation, But my point earlier was that as people were kind of emerging out of this, we're all coming out of our bunkers and starting to be able to book vendors again, people were so gun shy about putting that money down because they just were so afraid of what happened. We don't know what's going to happen. And I don't want to put this big deposit down and I can't even get it back. And so I mean, just kind of going back to Maroo, this idea of installment payments, the idea of kind of being financially smart. And then on the vendor side, I can't say exactly what this new part is. I think it's going to be in the next week or so it's going to come out, but it's very exciting and it's going to make it so much more efficient, and not only efficient, but cost-effective way, and in fact, everything to receive your payments. So it's something that I've not seen anyone offer before. I'm really excited. And I think that it's going to be something that really helps all of our businesses and helps clients.
Yeah. Well, Annie, this has been great. I think this is a good snapshot of what you're doing, and I really appreciate you taking the time. I think that it's fascinating what you're doing. Whether people agree or whether they feel comfortable or not with the way that you're pricing, I think it's something that people should really consider. How are they pricing, and not just make a decision and stick with it for the rest of their career, but we've got to reevaluate constantly, with this changing world that we're in.
Yeah, I mean, and thank you. And I've changed the way I've presented, my fee. This is now my third or fourth time changing it. And it does, you have to evolve with what the market is, with what your business is like. And so I think people get sometimes, I don't want to say stuck or afraid, but if it's not, especially if it's not broken, you never fix it. So if it's working for you, that's great. Keep going with whatever makes you happy. But I think it's times of challenges, or when you are in a moment where you're something about my business model, it's not bringing me joy at this moment, and I need to fix it. And so I've been presented for myself with a couple moments like that, and it's kind of pushed me to do all these things. And I mean, ultimately, I think you kind of can smell the direction I'm going in, but I really want to improve our industry. And maybe I'm drifting away from the day-to-day planning and going more definitely into these new platforms that it's still in the industry that I've been in, that I love, that's all my friends and colleagues are in, but making it a happier place, and a place where, with Plannie, for example, planners only have so many weekends or can only have a certain bandwidth for all their clients. But I want to offer a secondary source of revenue on all of their resources, which is their knowledge, right? So I want to be able to make everyone smarter about the way that they're doing their businesses and just open up some doors.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Annie. This has been really great. I appreciate your time.
Well, thank you so much. And I mean, I guess we'll kind of just all wait and see. I think we're at a junction point where we're seeing what happens now. What's the lasting effects of the few things that have happened in our industry? And it's exciting too. It's exciting at the same time. So I hope everyone else feels like that. Yeah, definitely so. Thank you. Thank you for listening to my conversation with Annie Lee. Be sure to check out her website, daughterofdesign.com. And her social media handle for that company on Instagram is Daughter of Design. You can get the rest of her websites and social media handles in the show notes at our website of theweddingbiz.com. And if you could think of 3 good friends who you feel would benefit and enjoy
this interview, please forward it to them. And next week's interview is going to be with Hugh Hauser, founder of H3 Events out of Nashville, Tennessee. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at The Wedding Biz, and we'll catch you next week.